You don't look like you belong here, old black man. This is for actual vets. The voice came sharp, flat, and loud enough for heads to turn. A young security guard, barely out of boot camp, barked at the thin man bundled in a threadbare military jacket. The cold rattled his shoulders, but he didn't respond. His grip only tightened on the folded American flag pressed to his chest. A few people glanced away awkwardly. Others laughed beneath their breath. No one stepped in. He didn't speak. He didn't defend himself. He simply turned and backed away, letting the icy wind meet him where welcome had failed. 10 minutes later, heavy footsteps pounded against the museum floor. A high-ranking officer strode through the grand lobby, voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Where is the man you turned away?" Charles Charlie Hayes had been counting down to this day for weeks. December 7th, the day the nation paused to honor Pearl Harbor's fallen. The National Veterans Museum had invited all who served, no cost, no questions. Charlie, now 87, hadn't driven in years. His knees protested every step. His vision blurred street signs and faces, but the years he spent in uniform, those remained sharp. Korea, 1952. Vietnam, 1968. Not memories, fixtures, places that lived inside him like bone. His morning began before sunrise. He washed slowly, shaved by instinct, and reached for the jacket that had been with him longer than most people in his life. A single medal, polished the night before, waited on the lapel. His route involved 3 buses. Transfers timed to the minute. It wasn't easy, but he preferred it that way. When his granddaughter had offered a ride, he smiled and shook his head. "You got your own life to keep up with. Let me walk mine." By mid-morning, Charlie stood at the foot of the museum's marble steps. Flags flapped above the entrance. A banner stretched across the pillars. In memory. In gratitude. He took a moment, bracing himself before joining the line. Families with kids stood ahead, chattering and snapping photos. A few younger vets, backs straight, collars sharp, moved through the checkpoint with ease. They flashed cards, got nods. At the front, a young guard with a buzz cut leaned lazily against a podium. When Charlie approached, he offered a warm nod. "Morning." The guard didn't return the gesture. "Identification?" Charlie kept his tone steady. "Served overseas, 2 tours. 38th Infantry in Korea. Then assigned to field work during Vietnam." That made the guard finally look up. He scanned Charlie head to toe. No ID in sight. Just weathered skin, a faded jacket, and boots that had seen decades. The pause stretched too long. Charlie didn't flinch. He'd been here before. Not this building, but this moment. And across the lobby, someone else had noticed. Charlie stood steady, though the tremble in his hands betrayed him. The guard eyed the worn jacket, the aged face, the fragile stance. "Sir, we need official documentation, military ID, VA card, or discharge papers. We can't just take someone's word for it." Charlie nodded slowly, reaching into his coat. "I haven't had an ID in years," he said gently. "But I brought this." From a protective sleeve, he unfolded an old photograph, black and white, edges frayed. A younger version of himself stood beside his unit, the uniforms unmistakable, the Korean landscape stark behind them. The guard barely looked. "That could be anyone," he muttered. "No ID, no entry. Those are the rules." A woman nearby, wrapped in designer wool, leaned toward another guest. "Pitiful," she whispered, not low enough. "Always someone pretending. Free food draws them in." A few chuckles followed. The guard motioned with a sharp hand. "Sir, you'll need to step aside. There's a line." Charlie didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just turned, his spine straight as memory would allow. Pride kept him upright as he stepped away. No words, no anger, only quiet resolve. The wind felt colder as he descended the marble steps. His coat did little to stop it now. The folded flag pressed to his chest was more than cloth. It was his brother's. The one draped across his casket, sent home from Korea. Charlie held it tighter. He didn't notice the woman across the street. Sharp blazer, hair pinned tight, phone to her ear. She had watched everything, and she was already making a call. Inside, the ceremony unfolded untouched. A museum official gave a polished speech about bravery and sacrifice. Spotlights lit a children's choir singing hymns in practiced harmony. On giant screens, a video played. Shining faces of young veterans shared sound bites of pride, of purpose, spliced with historic war clips. Today, the director proclaimed, pausing for applause. "We honor those who answered the call, who placed country above self." The room responded with standing ovation. Outside, Charlie sat on a metal bench near the curb, waiting for the next bus. His hands curled around the flag, holding it like something fragile or sacred. The world moved around him. Engines, voices, city noise. But his mind wasn't there. He thought of his brother, who never got to age. He thought of the men he served with, men who lived only in faded letters and his thinning memory. Inside that building, people clapped for an ideal, a sanitized version of service, young, clean, heroic. He had long understood the truth. America loved its soldiers in theory, polished and photogenic. But the worn-down, forgotten ones, often left outside in the cold, it didn't hurt anymore. What once sparked outrage had settled into something deeper. Not bitterness, just a quiet kind of grief. Elsewhere, in a gray federal building across town, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vaughn walked with purpose down a quiet hallway, her boots clicking in rhythmic steps. She'd just taken a call, and everything she thought she was doing today had just changed. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vaughn moved with practiced urgency, her boots echoing off the polished floors as she made her way through the corridors of the Department of Military Affairs. A 20-year Army veteran and West Point graduate, she was known for her discipline, her precision, and her intolerance for disrespect, especially when it targeted those who had worn the uniform before her. She knocked once on a heavy wooden door before entering without waiting. "Sir, there's a situation at the National Veterans Museum. You need to hear this." General Marcus Reed looked up from his desk, eyes sharp beneath silver brows. 4 stars sat on each shoulder of his pressed uniform. At 62, Reed's name carried weight. A decorated warfighter, master strategist, and fierce advocate for the men and women who had served under his command. He'd earned his reputation in the field, not the headlines. "What kind of situation?" he asked evenly. "I witnessed an elderly veteran being turned away from this morning's tribute ceremony. The guard refused him entry due to lack of identification." Reed's expression shifted, just slightly. "Who was he?" Vaughn spoke plainly, her tone tight. "Judging by his jacket and unit insignia, he served in Korea and Vietnam." He offered no argument. "Just left. Quiet. Carried a folded flag." The room was silent for a moment. Then she placed a folder on his desk. He gave a name. "Charles Hayes. I had someone run a search." Reed flipped it open. The contents inside detailed a long and decorated career. 38th Infantry Regiment, Korea. 5th Special Forces, Vietnam. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. Multiple commendations. Service records filled with battle dates, unit citations, and leadership notes. He stopped mid-page. His fingers hovered above an old photograph. "Hayes. Charles Hayes?" he said slowly. "Yes, sir." Reed stood up. His voice was quieter now, not softer, deeper. "That man saved my father's life." He looked out the window, memory flickering behind his eyes. "Incheon, 1950. My father's tank was hit and burning. Hayes pulled him from the wreckage under machine gun fire, dragged him half a mile through enemy territory. My father told that story every year. Said he owed every day of his life to a soldier named Hayes." He turned back, voice like steel. "Clear my entire schedule. I want my transport ready in 5 minutes." "Understood," Vaughn said, already reaching for her phone. "This isn't a matter of rank anymore," Reed added, pulling on his coat. "It's personal." Minutes later, a government motorcade sliced through downtown. Black SUVs moving with calculated speed. No sirens, just flashing lights and engines that didn't pause. Inside the lead vehicle, General Reed sat ramrod straight, eyes locked ahead, jaw set. As the museum came into view, the convoy fanned out with synchronized precision. Staff and visitors froze mid-step as the general stepped out of the lead vehicle in full-dress uniform, medals shining beneath the morning sun. Inside, the ceremony continued. Speeches about honor, sacrifice, and unity. At the front entrance, the same security guard stood, still scanning IDs, still deciding who looked the part. Then came the sound of approaching boots. Heavy, measured, certain. He looked up and saw stars. 4 of them. And a man walking toward him who didn't need to raise his voice to command the entire room. "Sir, welcome to the National—" "Where is he?" General Reed's voice cut through the marble hall like a dropped hammer. The security guard's mouth parted, but no words came. He blinked, sweat already forming along his hairline. The air shifted. I'm not sure I understand." The man you turned away. The veteran. Reed's tone was steel. Where is he? Sir. There was an older gentleman. No ID. You told him. This is for real veterans, didn't you? The words dropped like stone in a glass room. Silence rippled across the space as the guard shrank an inch. Across the floor, the museum director hurried toward them, adjusting his tie mid-step. General Reed, what an honor. Is there an issue we can— Oh, there's an issue, Reed said, turning slowly. His voice had cooled, but his eyes had not. While you were up here giving speeches about honoring service, one of your staff was out front turning away a man who actually earned it. The murmurs grew louder. A few reporters had already stepped closer, eyes wide, cameras ready. Where is Charles Hayes? Reed asked again, his voice raised now, not in anger, but in command. The man who was denied entry today? People stopped walking. Staff paused. Even the children in the choir rehearsal nearby went quiet. The director looked between Reed and the guard like a man caught in a storm without cover. There must be a miscommunication. We welcome all veterans, of course, with proper identification, Reed said, slicing through the excuse. Let me tell you what happens to identification when a man carries it through 2 wars, through jungle humidity and winter trenches. It falls apart, just like his knees, just like his hands. But you know what doesn't fall apart? He turned to the growing crowd, voice ringing clear across the rotunda. His service. A hush swept the room. Phones were lifted. A dozen cameras began recording. You had a man outside this building who's been nominated for the Medal of Honor, Reed said, his voice breaking ever so slightly. And you shut the door in his face. Gasps spread like fire. Charles Hayes, Reed continued, stepping forward now, saved my father's life at Incheon, pulled him from a tank engulfed in flames, took burns to both hands doing it. If it weren't for him— He stopped, swallowed. I wouldn't be standing here. The director's complexion drained to gray. General, please understand. I had no idea. No, Reed snapped. Because you've turned remembrance into pageantry, into marketing, into an image of service that's neat, palatable, and convenient. And when someone doesn't fit that image, you shut them out. Lieutenant Colonel Vaughn approached quietly, speaking into Reed's ear. He nodded once, then turned to a nearby officer. Find Mr. Hayes. Now. The officer saluted and moved fast. The ceremony had halted. No one clapped. No one moved. Just the sound of boots leaving the hall and the quiet weight of what had just been said. The museum's main hall had gone still, though the ceremony technically hadn't stopped. Conversations died. Chairs sat half-filled. The confrontation from minutes earlier now moved through the building like a current. Unseen, but felt by everyone. Faces wore discomfort. Some, shame. General Reed turned back toward the museum director, voice firm, but composed. You want to know why Charles Hayes wasn't wearing his full medals today? He asked. Why only a single bronze star was pinned to his coat? The director, now visibly shaken, said nothing. Because the rest of his decorations are in his brother's home, Reed said. James Hayes, killed in Korea. Charles gave the medals to his widow, told her they belonged to the real hero in the family. His voice held no rage now, just reverence. That's the kind of man you pushed aside today. Across the plaza, Charlie Hayes sat quietly on a snow-dusted bench, the air sharp and still. The flag was still in his lap, his fingers curled around it as if it could anchor him. The bus hadn't come. Or maybe it had, and he'd missed it. Time slipped sometimes. He didn't mind. His thoughts were far from the curb. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the quiet, even precise steps that instantly struck a familiar rhythm in his bones. Military. A young officer in dress blues stopped in front of him, posture perfect. Mr. Hayes, he said, offering a sharp salute. General Reed requests your presence, sir. Charlie blinked. General Reed? Yes, sir. If you'll allow me, I'll escort you now. The officer extended a hand. Charlie hesitated, then rose slowly, his joints complaining. But something in him straightened as he stood. The folded flag remained clutched in one hand. As they crossed the wide plaza, Charlie took in the sight. Black government vehicles lined up near the steps. A small gathering had formed. Press, civilians, staff, and soldiers. Every head turned as he approached. At the top of the stairs stood a man in full military dress, his stance unshakable, 4 stars on each shoulder. When Charlie reached the base of the steps, General Reed stepped down and stopped in front of him. With crisp precision, He raised a salute, the kind given only to the most revered. "Master Sergeant Hayes," he said clearly, using Charlie's highest earned rank. "I'm Marcus Reed. My father was Lieutenant William Reed, 38th Infantry, September 14th, 1950. Charlie's brows lifted. A pause, then his face softened. "Well, I'll be," he said, a slow grin forming. "Little Billy Reed's boy." Reed nodded. Charlie's eyes welled slightly. "Your daddy always said you'd go far. He'd be proud of those stars. Proud of the man you became." "He made sure I knew your name," Reed replied. "Made sure I understood what real bravery looked like." Around them, silence gave way to reverence. Uniformed officers began stepping forward, one by one, coming to attention. Then, saluting. Not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Visitors followed. Some placed hands to their hearts. Others bowed their heads. And for the first time in years, Charlie Hayes stood tall. Not just an old man in a weathered coat, but a soldier being seen, being honored, and finally, being remembered. "We've got one last thing to settle, Sergeant." General Reed offered his arm, his voice firm but warm. "There's a ceremony in there honoring veterans, and it's missing the one man who earned that spot more than anyone." Charlie glanced at him, the corner of his mouth lifting. Then, without a word, he took the general's arm, and together they climbed the marble steps, steps that had barred him only an hour earlier. This time, no one stopped him. The same guard who'd dismissed him earlier stood stiffly at his post, eyes cast low. He didn't speak. The museum director stepped forward, clearly preparing to deliver a speech of apology. But General Reed cut him off with a look sharp enough to silence a room. "Don't talk. Listen. Today you learn from a man who doesn't need a podium to teach you what service really means." Charlie, ever composed, took it all in with quiet grace. He leaned toward the general and whispered, "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." Reed shook his head, eyes steady. "With all due respect, Sergeant Hayes, I did." By sunrise the next morning, the story had exploded across every platform. Cell phone footage of the confrontation, Reed's words, the stunned silence, the salute, circulated faster than the museum's own coverage. Images of Charlie returning through the museum doors beside General Reed became symbols of something larger. Major outlets picked it up. Talk shows, veterans' blogs. The nation, it seemed, had been hungry for this kind of reminder. A reminder that dignity doesn't always come in uniform, but it's never supposed to be denied at the door. Within 48 hours, the museum director submitted his resignation. "For personal reasons," the statement read, though no one bought it. The security guard was reassigned after issuing a written apology that included the words, "I didn't see him for who he was. I should have." But the more meaningful shift came from higher up. The museum's board issued a sweeping change to policy. Effective immediately, all veterans, regardless of ID, rank, or era, would be welcomed. Their staff would undergo new training, not on paperwork, but on perception. The official statement read, "Military service isn't always visible. Our duty is to recognize it in all its forms, with humility, respect, and heart." Charlie Hayes suddenly found himself the center of more attention than he'd ever asked for. Interview offers poured in. Most of them, he turned down. "I'm not the story," he told a reporter. "There's thousands more like me. You just don't see us." But even in refusing the spotlight, Charlie's presence left a mark. Veteran organizations across the country reported spikes in donations and volunteer support. Retirement centers noted an uptick in community outreach. Teachers invited local vets into classrooms to share their stories, many for the first time. The National Veterans Museum dedicated an entire new wing, the Forgotten Warriors, a space built to honor those too often overlooked, by age, by poverty, by assumptions. Charlie was invited to cut the ribbon. He did, humbly, in his same weathered coat. But of everything that came from it, one gesture mattered most to Charlie. A simple wooden bench was installed just outside the museum entrance. Not ornate, not flashy. Just a clean bronze plaque that read, "Reserved for those who served." And from the day it was placed, a quiet tradition emerged. If a veteran stood nearby, no one sat, no rules posted, no signs needed. Just a shared, unspoken respect. Every Sunday, when the weather allowed, Charlie would sit near that bench. Some days he said nothing. Other days, he told stories. Children listened. Young vets asked questions. And passersby stopped, not for the photo, but to shake his hand. Not as a man in old boots, but as living history. A bridge between what was and what must never be forgotten. Across the city, and slowly across the country, people began to see service differently, in subtle nods, in quiet moments of recognition, in eyes that took an extra second to really see, because the truth had settled deep into the hearts of many. You can't know someone's battles by the way they walk, and you'll never know their service by how they dress. But you can honor them by seeing them, and remembering that true respect doesn't come from a badge, a speech, or a folded flag. It comes from knowing that no veteran should ever be turned away from the legacy they helped build.